Hi friends, guess what day it is? Library Day. So we are on chapter 11 of The Silver Arrow. And if you haven't recently watched last week's reading, I'll catch you up a little bit. They're on the train. They've gone back to the first station. They've picked up all the animals. The animals can speak. Kate and Tom are learning how to operate the train. They're taking tickets. There's an argument between a bunch of animals happening in the library car. So that's where we left off. This is chapter 11, and it's called The Baby That Looked Like a Pine Cone. The landscape outside was changing. They'd left the winter forest behind and entered what looked more like a tropical jungle. When Kate opened a door and looked out, which was kind of awesome all on its own, sticking your head out the open door of a moving train without getting yelled at by the conductor because the conductor was you. The air was warm and humid and smelled like an incredible wealth of green life. The station platform was overgrown with vines and ferns and littered with giant leaves. Palm trees crowded around it and green shoots pushed up between the railroad ties. Waiting on the platform were an iguana, two large snakes, a couple of amazing golden-haired monkeys that looked like they'd had their faces spray-painted pink, and something like a small hippo with a big nose that she thought might be a tapir, plus some colorful glossy frogs that looked like pieces of candy. The air was full of burbling, shrieking birdsong and a gorgeous, translucent green light that showered down through the trees. The sign on the platform said Tamakumque, which much later Kate would figure out was in the Amazon. Kate thought she'd better announce the name of the station, the way they did on a regular train, though she had no idea how to pronounce it. She said it several times in different ways, just to be sure. She must have gotten it right at least once, because a few animals quietly left their compartments and trotted and slithered and fluttered out into the heat of the jungle. Kate grabbed a banana from the dining car before the next stop, which was in a bamboo grove. The station after that was giant redwoods, and after that was a dusty plain where a brutal sun beat down. It was so hot she had to take off her blazer. Only two hardly wild dogs got on there, and one very small tortoise that took what seemed like half an hour to cross the platform. Kate felt like she was starting to get the hang of this, whatever this was, enough that she had some spare energy to start wondering about the big picture. As soon as she did, a million questions started asking themselves in her head. How could a giant steam train go to all these places? Why did nobody else know about this? Was the train invisible? Who put in all these tracks? Who sold all these animals their tickets? And so on. In a way, she didn't want to ask, because she was afraid that doing so might disturb some fragile enchantment, and it would all turn out to be a dream and evaporate as mysteriously as it had arrived. She just wanted it to keep going, but at the same time she knew that sooner or later those questions would need answering. The next stop was another rainforest. When all the other animals had gotten on and off the train, there was one left on the platform all by itself. At first, Kate wasn't completely sure it was an animal. It looked more like a pine cone. It was tiny and brown and round, with pointy overlapping scales. But when she looked closer, she saw that it had 4 legs and a tail and a little face. It was curled up tightly, its eyes shut, fast asleep. Touching unidentified wild animals with her bare hands was not a thing Kate was completely comfortable with, but she could also see that clutched tightly to the creature's little belly in its 2 clawed front paws was a ticket. And it looked so helpless. It was just a baby, and it was all alone. She sighed. She even said the word out loud. Sigh. She picked up the little animal, cupping it gently in her 2 hands, praying it wouldn't bite her or scratch her or go to the bathroom on her, and quickly carried it inside. Its scales were dry and scratchy. The train started up again. Kate took it back to the library. She couldn't think what else to do with it. The porcupine, the cat, the heron, and the snake were all still arguing, but they stopped when she came in. Okay, she said. Does anybody know what this is? The cat peered at it. Looks like a pine cone. That's what I thought, Kate said. Or an artichoke, the cat said. It's not. It's some kind of animal. That, the heron said, is a baby pangolin. I don't know everything, Kate said, but I think I know what a penguin looks like. No, not a penguin, a pangolin. It's the only mammal in the world with scales. Pangolins are incredibly rare. Awesome, Kate placed it carefully on a cushion on the couch. Congratulations on your new baby pangolin. Take good care of it. She left before anybody could object. Then she went forward to check on Tom and the engines. Tom was alive and well, but extremely sweaty, and almost completely covered in coal dust. Might be time to hit the swimming pool car, Kate said. Click, bing. Remember, that's the sound the train makes when it's getting ready to talk to them on paper. It's going well, thank you, but I'm a little low on fuel. She'd almost forgotten that the train could talk. There's a lot going on in your life when you have more urgent things to think about than a talking train. Low on fuel. Okay, that sounds important. She seemed to remember Uncle Herbert saying something about that. Can I help? Click. Bing! Not yet. We'll have to stop for it somewhere soon, though. One of the things Kate was learning on the train was what to do when you saw a problem, which was that you tried to solve it. At home, her usual approach to a problem was to ignore it until her parents noticed it, at which point they would solve it for her. But here on the train, there were no parents. She was in charge. Not solving problems was way easier than solving them, obviously. But left to their own devices, problems usually only got worse. It's better to get things over with. In the meantime, they had their next train lesson. The Silver Arrow talked Kate and Tom through the process of getting the engines going from a standing start. The train was right about one thing. It was a good teacher. It taught them how to read the steam pressure gauge and the little glass tube that showed the water level in the boiler. They went over the brakes and the throttle again, and it introduced them to a mysterious but important device called a reversing lever, which controlled how much steam power went to the pistons, or something like that. I thought that's what the throttle did, Kate said. Well, think of it like the gearbox on a car. I don't know how that works either. Okay, the gears on a bicycle. Wait. Tom said. What's There's a station coming up. Okay. But it's not on the schedule. Can I actually see the schedule? Kate said. No. Well, what should we do? Don't ask me. You're the conductor. Kate thought of saying, well, you're the train, or how am I supposed to know? Or maybe, but Tom's a conductor too. But she didn't. She couldn't really. She hadn't asked to be the conductor of a magic steam train, or not exactly. But deep down, she knew that she kind of had. She'd wanted something real, something that wasn't kids' stuff, something that mattered. And looky here, this was it. And Uncle Herbert had told her to get off the train right at the start, and she hadn't. If she wasn't sure what to do, she would just have to guess based on what she did know and live with the consequences. Probably that was an important life lesson she was supposed to be learning from this whole experience, which was fine, she guessed, though she hoped there weren't too many more of them. Okay, let's stop, she said. Let's find out what's going on. Chapter 12. Kate finds out what's going on. So they throttled the Silver Arrow down and fiddled with the reversing lever and applied the brakes, and Kate took her ticket puncher and straightened her conductor's hat and went back to the passenger cars. They were chugging through a pine forest now, and the air smelled pleasantly like their garage had after the time Kate spilled turpentine in there. They pulled up at a plain cement platform, and Kate threw the big brass lever that opened the doors. Something was different. Usually there was a sign on the platform saying where they were, but this time Kate couldn't see anyone there. 6 or 7 gray squirrels, a huge gray pig, and a couple of brown snakes waited on the platform. On the ground and the branches overhead sat a whole flock of black birds with a slight iridescent rainbow shine to their wings that reminded Kate of an oil slick. She recognized the birds. They were sparrows, or no, not sparrows, starlings. That's what they were. None of the creatures moved. They just sat there staring at her. Then she realized that something else was different too. None of them were holding tickets. So hi, Kate said. The giant pig trotted forward and stood right in front of her. He really was unbelievably big, as tall as she was, and he looked much more fit somehow than your average pig. In fact, he seemed to be completely made out of muscle. That's not a pig at all, Kate thought. That must be a wild boar. She'd never seen one in real life. He had tiny eyes and a wet nose and huge upward-thrusting yellow tusks. Kate cleared her throat. Tickets, please, she said. The boar just stood there in front of her. She tried again. I'm sorry, but you can't ride the train without a ticket. I don't have a ticket, the boar said in a deep voice. Well, Kate said slowly, I guess you can't ride the train then. Then I guess we have a problem. Kate frowned. She wasn't immediately warming to this boar. I'm sorry to have to say this, she said, but it seems more like you have a problem. You don't sound very sorry, chittered a squirrel. So that's how it's going to be, Kate thought. She folded her arms with more firmness than she really felt. I really am sorry, but I don't make the rules. If it's that important, why don't you go get a ticket and come back? I'm sure we'll be back here soon. That was a fib. She wasn't sure at all. But she really wanted to bring this conversation to an end. She stepped back onto the train and closed the doors. But the doors didn't close because the boar stuck its huge head right in between them. He had large furry ears and not the slightest trace of a neck. I don't want a ticket, he said. I want to get on this train. Now be a good girl and open the door. They stared at each other. He didn't seem to be even the slightest bit bothered by having the doors closed on his head. Kate thought about it. Really, who would it hurt if she let them on? It's not like she needed their money, if animals even had money. She wondered again how exactly they got their tickets. Plus, this boar weighed about 5 times what she did and could probably kill her in about 10 seconds, even taking into account the awesome kicking power of her new steel-capped boots. One of the brown snakes pushed forward between the boar's hooves. Look, I can see you're in a tough position. The snake's voice was calm and reasonable and almost sympathetic. You're on a tight schedule. You have to get the train moving. But the thing is, we've got all day, and we're not going to let this train go until you let us on. So you can't win, so why not just let it slide and we'll all be on our way. Trust us, a squirrel said. You don't want to make an issue out of this. It would have been so easy to give in. Giving in was almost always the easiest thing in Kate's experience. The only problem was, what was the problem? It felt wrong. This was her train. Uncle Herbert had given it to her, and it was the first thing that ever was, well and truly, her responsibility. It came with rules, and the rule was that you had to have a ticket. Maybe it was a stupid rule, but that was up to her, not these animals. It was time to decide whether she was going to let herself be bullied. And when she realized that she'd already decided. Well, I don't trust you. Not in the slightest. She wished her voice wasn't shaking, but it was. And I'm not making an issue out of this. It's already an issue. Get off my train, please. Right now. Kate pointed in the direction of off the train, in case that made it any more clear. She stared into the boar's tiny orange eyes, and she wished Tom were there. Well, the boar didn't move. Instead, he snorted at her. Ronk! The sound was deafening, like an explosion. She jumped 3 feet backward out of sheer terror. Ronk, ronk, ronk! Well, Kate had gotten so used to animals talking politely that she'd almost forgotten they were wild creatures. They were not tame. They weren't safe. The boar strained at the doors to get at her. He tossed his head viciously. With those tusks, and Kate cowered back even farther. She had said she'd wanted this. She thought she wanted an adventure, but she hadn't thought at all about how scary it would be. She hadn't thought about the fact that when you were in it, you don't know how it will end. For all you knew, you could end up gored and trampled by an angry boar, far from home, and never see your parents again. What on earth do you think you're doing? Get your fat head out of those doors! The voice came from behind Kate. Kate didn't dare take her eyes off the boar, but as she watched, an incredible thing happened to him. The boar's little eyes went as wide as they could go, and his huge, snorting face showed an expression Kate hadn't thought it was capable of. It was fear. Kate risked a glance behind her. The voice belonged to the porcupine. His black and white danger-striped quills were rattling and sticking up from his body in a huge, ridiculous ruff. It was like a deadly case of bedhead. He was rude and sulky and thoroughly unpleasant, and Kate had never been so glad to see anyone in her whole life. The porcupine took a step forward. The boar took a step backward, and Kate slammed the doors shut in his big fat face. The engine chuffed. The train pulled out of the station. Kate's knees felt weak. She sank down onto the floor. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. I did not want him on this train. She hugged herself. You were right, the porcupine said. He didn't belong here. The porcupine's quills were lying back down now. He must be able to control them, she thought. I'm just glad I didn't have to quill him, he said perfectly calmly. Takes weeks to grow back a good quill. Does it hurt when you use one? A little. It's like having a hair pulled out. Now, why don't you come with me to the dining car? You look pale, and I'll bet you haven't eaten any lunch. We're going to stop there. Next week is chapter 13, The Station That Wasn't There. I hope you're enjoying it, and I'll see you guys soon.